Hello, I'm Yousef Munayyer, head of the Palestine-Israel program and senior fellow here at Arab Center, Washington, D.C., and your podcast host.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yara, and I'm a non-resident fellow here at Arab Center, Washington, D.C.
I'm Rami Khouri. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, a distinguished public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut.
I'm Hanna Alshaikh. I'm the Palestine Project Coordinator at Arab Center, Washington.
Welcome to another Hiwar episode. Hiwar is the Arabic word for dialogue or discussion, and in each of these episodes, I, along with my Arab Center colleagues, discuss some of the big issues of the day. Last time, we discussed the Israeli military's latest massacres in Gaza and spoke about Palestine at the UNGA. Now, as Israel expands its genocidal assault on Gaza City, it has also crossed a new line by carrying out strikes in yet another country, Qatar. We'll cover that and much more today. But before we get to that, we want to discuss first a major effort that's taking place to break the siege of Gaza once again by sea. A group of ships led by a number of activists from all over the world this time are trying to get humanitarian aid and supplies to Gaza and break the continual Israeli naval blockade on the Gaza Strip. We've seen efforts like this before, but this one seems different precisely because of the scale and of the urgency of this moment as well. Yara, can you tell us more about what's going on with this flotilla, what sort of progress it's made, and what challenges they've encountered so far?
Yeah, absolutely, Yousef. You know, as you said, we have seen these types of efforts before since Gaza has been under military blockade since 2007, which means, people cannot access Gaza easily by sea, by land, obviously by air. So just to give this brief history, since 2010, we have seen multiple of these kinds of efforts to break the naval blockade. We have seen efforts to try to do this via land as well. But the flotilla effort is able to bring together activists from all around the world. They're on these multiple ships, and they are, as you say, the goal has always been to both call attention to the siege and also to bring aid. Now, the amount of aid obviously is going to be nowhere near the actual amount of aid that is needed on the ground, but it is both a tangible and symbolic gesture of the aid need, especially, we have expanding famine. We have this complete siege since March, where we have these very few aid distribution centers where it's very difficult for people to get aid. They're very deadly, as people have heard. And now we have this growing invasion and occupation of Gaza City, where there are still hundreds of thousands of people. So the humanitarian need has never been greater. And so that is why we have seen these flotilla efforts continuing. Since 2010, where, as your listeners might know, we saw an invasion and raid of the flotilla that killed 10 activists that were on that ship. We have seen further flotillas in 2015, 2016, 2018, and then we've seen, of course, multiple flotilla efforts just earlier this year. Not a single flotilla has ever actually been able to reach Gaza. They have all been raided, intercepted, with the activists on board, either sent back or have been brought to Israel, detained, and then sent back to their home countries. So this is by far the largest flotilla effort. It is the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which started in the late 2010, joining the Global Samud Flotilla, which is what they're calling it. And so this is by far the largest number of ships, dozens of ships. There's over 300 activists aboard from 44 countries. There's some notable people on board, including Greta Thunberg, who was on one of the earlier flotillas from this year, several well-known actors and actresses, several former and current EU parliamentarians. And on their website, they say they have several goals. Number one, to break the illegal siege on Gaza by sea. Number two, to open a humanitarian corridor. And number three, and perhaps most significantly, to end the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. So we saw this flotilla leave from Barcelona. It made a stop in Tunisia where we had this incident that you referenced. So there was a CCTV captured drone strikes on at least, we believe, two of the ships. And obviously, and while they were docked in a Tunisian port. And obviously suspicion here that this was an Israeli act based on precedent and also simply the act itself. So it's, they are on the way, and listeners can track them at globalsamudflotilla.org. It literally shows the latitude and longitude of the ships. Many of the ships and the activists on board have social media accounts where they are, relaying what's going on, what's happening, and in the case that they are intercepted, attacked, anything like that, for evidence and documentation. The drone strikes, the Tunisian government described as premeditated. So obviously we are concerned about the future for the folks on these ships and what will happen as they get closer and closer to Gaza. Knowing kind of the danger here, there was a joint statement just a few days ago by 16 governments, including Turkey, Qatar, Mexico, Pakistan, Indonesia, Brazil, Libya, South Africa, and Spain, that confirmed that their citizens are on board and warned the Israelis not to attack the ships. So this is an ongoing situation. They are in the sea as we speak, heading closer and closer to Gaza. It is a worrisome time, and I think all of the people aboard are well aware of the potential risks. But I think at this stage, when there has been no meaningful external intervention from government actors, I mean, we're starting to see some talks of that. We're starting to see more reports come out confirming the genocidal nature of this military campaign. But I think this is really a cry from the grassroots, from civil society, from activists, from all sectors, to say we are done watching, and enough is enough. We have to break the siege, we have to end the violence, and we have to save lives. So I think this is a response to the lack of action that we're seeing really on any other diplomatic, political, or financial front. What happens remains to be seen, but I think we're all watching closely.
Yeah, thank you for that, Yara. And I mean, with these previous attempts, what we've seen, obviously, the biggest one that kind of got the most attention, and of course the deadliest one, was back in 2010 with the Mavi Marmara.
Right.
And we've seen mixed responses from the Israeli forces in the past, where in some cases they meet these ships in international waters, they take them over. In some cases we've seen situations where there's been sabotage on some of these ships.
Right.
Before they leave ports elsewhere in the Mediterranean.
Right.
That's, of course, widely suspected to be, the Israelis. In some cases, we've seen, third governments prevent these ships from taking off through coordination with the Israelis. But, the thing about this one, of course, is that this is a large number of ships, and it's the largest number of ships really since the flotilla that included the Mavi Marmara back in 2010. And just from a logistical perspective, from the perspective of the Israeli military, which obviously is trying to stop these ships from getting to Gaza, it presents a different kind of challenge than a single ship. And it raises a lot of concern about how this is going to be handled. And as we've seen the Israeli military handle most things, it's not with a lot of care for human life. It's not super surprising that there was also this strike in Tunis, where there's video of what looks like a drone strike. Everyone sort of expects that this was an Israeli operation to try to stop these ships, or at least intimidate them from going further. And of course, Tunis now joins a list of many different countries that the Israelis have bombed in recent weeks and months. And within days after striking these ships in Tunisian waters, the Israelis also carried out for the first time a strike in Qatar. which has, I think, sent shockwaves throughout the region and much of the world. Hanna, can you talk to us about what took place with this Israeli strike, what we've learned so far, and what it means?
Of course. So on September 9th, as we all know, Israel struck Qatar as the Hamas negotiating team reviewed the most recent U.S. ceasefire proposal. And it was targeting senior Hamas leadership. It was an attempt at a decapitation strike. And this was shortly after President Trump had issued an ultimatum to Hamas to accept the deal. Now, as the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister had told CNN, Qatar had provided a neutral space for conflict mediation. And I think it's important to point out that when the Mossad chief, David Barnea, and his team traveled to and from Doha frequently for negotiations, they do so with the understanding that their security is protected by the host. But of course, following the logic of a state that thinks its host with missiles does not care that it violated Qatar's sovereignty. And that was precisely the point of Israel's use of spectacular violence on September 9th. So in light of Trump's ultimatum, I should also add, the Qatari Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, had also stated that Hamas had shown more flexibility than ever. It looked like they were going to accept this proposal, despite very significant concessions they would have to make. But Israel put an end once and for all to the ceasefire negotiation charade, because really there's only one red line for Netanyahu and his government, and that is that the war must continue to keep his fragile coalition together and to keep him out of prison on corruption charges. It's not about hostages or security for Netanyahu. And because Israel's belligerent attacks have gone unchecked for 23 months, it's now behaving as a regional hegemon, and it's counting on U.S. support here. Now, there's so much to say about the many dimensions of the implications moving forward. And for the sake of time, I'm going to focus specifically on the U.S. role in the strike and what it might say about the U.S. role in the region. And so first, what we know. The White House narrative on the strike is that the U.S. military detected Israeli aircraft and demanded information from Israel. And at the same time, after this Israeli aircraft was detected, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff attempted to alert Qatar ahead of the attack. On the contrary, though, according to a report in Axios, 3 senior Israeli officials maintained that Netanyahu spoke to Trump 1 hour ahead of the strike, just enough time to cancel their plans if the U.S. objected. And so you judge for yourself. At any rate, the U.S. did not condemn the attack. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt justified the premise of striking negotiators. So while Trump was not happy that Qatar was hit by Israeli missiles, nobody has contested the principle of killing negotiators. And again, they were reviewing a U.S. ceasefire proposal. Washington's enablement now of Israel's provocations in the region and its belligerent, let's say, assertion of hegemony has entered a new stage. It set a dangerous precedent when it comes to matters of conflict de-escalation, matters of diplomacy, and the consequences are already reverberating, not just in the region, but worldwide. One reason for that is that Qatar's status as a major non-NATO U.S. ally didn't deter this Israeli attack. And now more than ever, it's cast doubt not only on if the U.S. is willing, but also in other cases, if it's able to defend its allies, to serve as a mediator between Israeli belligerents vis-a-vis key U.S. allies, and to uphold its mutual defense pacts or its other agreements. So within the region, there are 3 things that are happening, right? Either defense pacts, partnerships, or other sort of military agreements that are developing, one within the GCC, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and Egypt and Turkey. And we can talk more about that later. But the point is just to say that there are already direct consequences of the view of U.S. regional allies, that the U.S. is no longer a reliable partner. And while these sentiments were growing for years, it does predate the last 23 months. Israel's regional war has thrown the brick on the accelerator about some of these concerns. And when it comes to materializing these sentiments and these concerns and turning them into concrete changes. Now, the bottom line, as I've said elsewhere, is that Israel struck the negotiator in the capital of the mediator. To say this killed the prospect of a negotiated ceasefire in Gaza anytime soon would be the understatement of the century. Its strike on Qatar was effectively an Israeli act of war on the concept of diplomacy itself. It sent a final message to the world that Israel will accept no diplomatic solution to the genocide in Gaza and its regional provocations. Washington will co-sign its behavior, no matter how much it threatens U.S. interests. And so while all other parties have expressed willingness to participate in talks after the strike, it's become extremely clear that Israel's genocide in Gaza, its threats to annex the West Bank, its war on the surrounding region will not be resolved through diplomacy. And it would be naive to think otherwise. Israel's long history of disregard for international law, its own ceasefire agreements, international accords, and its active efforts to sabotage diplomacy vis-a-vis the Palestinians, and going unchecked for this, has empowered Israel today to escalate this. And this was precisely the underlying dynamic behind most of its major wars on Gaza before October 7th, 2023. But in those cases, when it's just those 2 million Gazans, the world was content to look away. And so now that Israel has been emboldened and the consequences are encroaching on the borders further and further away, it's important to realize that Israel's victims in the region are not going to tolerate this for much longer. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that that would be the case. I mean, if anything, I think many are asking, why some of this motion took so long to come about, and why not more. And it shouldn't have cost the lives of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza and the utter destruction of an ancient city that's happening as we speak right now, meaning Gaza City.
Yeah, and Hanna, if you're sitting in Doha, you're wondering what that U.S. military base that's there is doing for you. You're wondering what your status as a major non-NATO ally is doing for you in Washington. And if you're sitting elsewhere in the region, whether that's in Egypt or in Turkey, other American allies, you're asking these same questions. How long will it be before Israel strikes our territory? Obviously, the Egyptians have also played a role as mediators throughout this process. They've hosted Palestinian negotiators within their territory. If Israel is striking in Qatar and claiming that this is legitimate with support of the White House because of who they're targeting, what's going to stop them from doing so in Egypt? And likewise in Turkey as well. So this is obviously something that has really shaken the region. And I think also, as you said, blowing up this idea of diplomacy, I think it's also dealt a real blow to Israel's standing in the world, even though that was already suffering significantly. But I think in some spaces where there was continued sympathy for Israel at this time, it was around this idea that, Israel is trying to get its captives out of Gaza. And it's very hard now to make the argument that that's what Israel is actually interested in when it's killing the people who are negotiating about that where in the country that's mediating those negotiations. And so it's become, I think, quite obvious to really everyone around the world right now, as you noted, Israel's red line is the continuation of this genocide. Shortly after this strike, of course, we saw the heads of state elsewhere in the Arab world come to Doha to show support. And there was also a major meeting of Arab and Islamic states that took place as well. Rami, can you talk to us a little bit about how the Arab world is responding to this? Hanna has said that, people are wondering why has it taken so long, but also what is the response that we've seen so far? Is it much of anything material? How have the Arab and Muslim states that met recently responded to these strikes in Qatar?
Well, they've responded in the way that they've responded in the last 50, 60 years, which is with pretty impressive statements, meetings, declarations, mild hints or threats even about further action. And so the actual outcome of the meeting in Doha, which was Arab and Islamic, which is important in itself. It's not just the Arab countries, but we've had the Arab-Islamic Combine try to operate after the 2002 Arab peace plan. The Islamic states all supported it. It doesn't seem to impress the Israelis or anybody else, unfortunately. But the Arab countries really came face to face last week with a dilemma of their own making, which is that they have spent trillions of dollars on defense equipment and strategic links and joint research and joint exercises with Western countries, especially, including the US, and they're not able to defend themselves. It's not that they're not able technically, they have the technology, but they cannot really afford to threaten the US very seriously, or threaten Israel and the US together, because they're so dependent for their very existence. Economic support, all the military equipment the Arab countries have bought from the US requires American training, spare parts, operational assistance in some cases. And the US has done this, of course, in a dramatic way to help Israel attack Arabs. But the Arabs cannot possibly seriously think that they can go to the US and say, we're going to break our military ties with you and look for somebody else to protect us. Partly because it would take around 2 decades to make that kind of transition. The Egyptians did it back in the 70s. They reduced their link with the Soviets and increased their links with the US. But that takes a long time to make that kind of shift. So the Arab countries are in a real corner of their own making. And the important thing is not so much what came out of the summit. The important thing is how the summit declaration, which has a few intriguing elements in it, links to the wider regional and global transformations, or let's say adjustments or repositionings that are taking place. And this refers specifically to a couple of things. First, you have the Saudi Pakistani agreement that was signed on strategic mutual defense. That's pretty scary stuff, strategic mutual defense, when one of the countries is super rich and the other country has nuclear weapons. So we don't know what that means in practice, but it is, again, another indicator that the Arab countries are not satisfied with the current arrangement, where they essentially rely on the US and some Western powers to protect them. And some Arabs relied on Iran to protect them. And that proved to have limitations as well. So the strategic link between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan on arms on defense is a really significant signal that the Arab countries are trying to diversify their strategic defense operations and collaborations. This is by nature a slow process. It links to the other big thing going on around the world, which is the emergence of new groups of countries, the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement, the Russian, Chinese, Korean meetings, North Korea, the BRICS countries, the Hague Group, and others like that are going to emerge, the people involved in the flotilla. Groups of countries around the world are becoming more assertive on issues linked to Gaza and the Middle East, and with the Arabs collectively much more concerned that their strategic reliance on the U.S. is not going to help them, because the U.S. is helping Israel attack Arabs, has been for 5 decades, and will continue to do so probably. So I think it's the combination of the ongoing slow motion strategic reconfigurations and realignments, where Arab countries have more links with countries beyond Western Europe and the United States. And the statement in the declaration that talked about, the U.S., the Arab countries should look at available options in the United Nations they should break ties unilaterally. Countries should break ties with Israel. Collective sanctions against Israel maybe throwing Israel out of the UN or suspending Israel in the UN. Those kind of threats are not made lightly. And the Arabs know that when you make a threat and don't carry it out, it reduces your credibility because they've done that for decades. But the situation is much more serious now with the rampant Israeli militarism and the explicit and continually reaffirmed American total support for whatever Israel wants to do, militarily, ethnic cleansing, annexation, whatever Israel wants to do. The U.S., in its actions, has shown that it will support everything that Israel wants to do. And ultimately, this is an indicator that the Arabs have really not done very well on the test of sovereignty as sovereign countries, their ability to protect themselves, to promote the development of their people, to promote the security, the collective security of the region. The Arab countries have not done very well, and they've realized now that one of the reasons for that is they've relied too heavily on bilateral ties with a couple of Western powers. So I think this is a moment of signals being sent collectively and individually. And all around the region, you're getting reconciliations between Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Those are all going on at the same time, which is part of this whole process. So I think we should see if other actions are going to take place soon that are symbolic, but also indicate this strategic diversification is going to continue apace. The Israelis, last point I'll make is the Israelis don't particularly care about any of this. The only thing they care about is the support of the global leading imperial power, which is the United States. And this is in line with Zionist pre-state thinking and Israeli state thinking since 1920. In the early years, the pre-state Zionist movements only were really concerned about the British government. It was the big colonial imperial power. They didn't care about anything else, public opinion or whatever. Now, after the World War II, after the 1960s also, the Israelis only care about the US government. They don't care about American public opinion. They don't care about Jewish opinion. They only care about the US government. And this is something that we should learn this lesson. The Arabs are trying to figure out how they can make adjustments that guarantee their security, reach a respectable peace agreement between Israel and Palestine that is legitimate, and maintain strong ties with the U.S. and the world, because they gravitate to Western culture more than they gravitate to Korea and China and Russia and India. So this is the dilemma that we're facing, but it's a dilemma that is now volatile. It's in motion, and this is a fascinating moment.
Yeah, Rami, thanks for all that. I mean, two things I would just add to the security piece in the Gulf. You all will probably remember back in 2010, Israeli operatives carried out a assassination in the Emirates of Mahmoud al-Mabhouh, who was a founder of the Qassam Brigades and was in a hotel in Dubai. And it was a very embarrassing incident at the time for Emirati security. And less than a decade later, the UAE normalized ties with Israel. And you wonder what kind of message that sent to the Israelis about what they can get away with in the Gulf. And on the Saudi-Pakistan agreement, mutual defense pact is pretty serious stuff, especially considering that Pakistan was in a hot war with India this year. And the Saudis, of course, are in a region that is, filled with tons of armed conflict, and of course, were at war with their neighbors to the south for many years in Yemen. So there are very, very serious potential implications of this, and I think it sends a pretty strong message about just how much people throughout the region are looking elsewhere for security guarantees. Rami, you noted that the Israelis seem to only care about the United States. And, even though Europe is their biggest trading partner, we're seeing more and more European countries start to take steps to distance themselves from Israel, to take some sort of accountability measures. Spain has been particularly vocal about this, along with other countries as well, including Ireland and the Netherlands. A number of countries now saying they're not going to participate in Eurovision, which for some reason really, really matters to Israel. I've never really been able to understand it. But several countries are now saying they won't participate if the Israelis are in. There's sort of growing pressure to isolate Israel from international sports associations as well. And we've had a UN commission of inquiry conclude this week that yes, Israel is in fact carrying out genocide in Gaza. Just the latest sort of assessment that finds that Israel is committing genocide, in a long list of groups from around the world, internationally, locally, who've all come to this conclusion. And more people are starting to use the term and call it out for what it is. We've seen U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, who's been hesitant to refer to what Israel is doing as a genocide, finally come out and state that plainly this week, as well as others. How do we assess, and this is for all of you, how do we assess where we're at right now in terms of real demands for accountability, actual action starting to take place to prevent the continuation of this genocide?
Yeah, I'll just briefly jump in here. And I wrote a piece about this actually for the Arab Center, I think last month, about just all the different groups and experts and people coming together, public polling that is coalescing around this opinion of genocide. Now, this UN commission, it was kind of, I think, relatively recognized as a big deal. Of course, the commission itself has no accountability powers, cannot actually do anything with this. I think the hope is that the findings would be used as further evidence in cases in the ICJ and ICC. But I have a lot of people these days asking me, what is going on with those cases and why has there not been any update? And I think that it's a bit of cold comfort when you have these increasing recognitions at this point, almost exactly 2 years in. We've lost a minimum of 60 to 70,000 people. An Israeli general just the other day estimated that it was closer to 200,000 by their own count, and epidemiologists have estimated numbers in the hundreds of thousands as well. I think the goalposts keep changing in terms of what all these different bodies recognize and what that means. Used to be that if groups like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch came to these conclusions about any other setting, there would probably be some action, some sanctions, some expedited processes. We didn't see that when that happened. Then it took Holocaust and genocide scholars coming out. Then it was Israeli genocide and Holocaust scholars coming out. Now we're having this, UN commission. At the same time, in the background, there's, the ICJ case. The ICJ case has been extended. Israel asked for an extension, and so they won't even present their defense until 2026. Early then, people speculate that there won't be a return result, a case there or a verdict made for another potentially 1 or 2 years. So we're looking then at 2027. So I think this is useful in that it might give people who are still on the sidelines more evidence that they can use this term. We're seeing more and more prominent people speaking out about this, as you noted. I think the mayor of London just this morning also jumped in on this and called it genocide as well. But just like the state recognition thing, we are past the point where simply recognizing what's happening is a suitable enough response. There needs to be action behind this. And if people want to use these reports and findings to justify or expedite that action, that's great. But simply, this is a conversation that we could have been having a year and a half ago about what to call it. And now it seems like we're having it when we are in, a time of utter, we're in a communications blackout. Gaza City is being bombed. People are being further evacuated. We have this GHF scheme that we've talked about. Basically, every indicator is getting worse and worse. So the question now becomes, what are we going to do with these recognitions? I don't know the answer to that, really. And I don't know what the appetite is. We're seeing, again, some tiptoes about sanctions, about, as you said, some isolation. It seems like Israel itself is preparing for this isolation. But as Rami said earlier, if they still have the support of the United States, we don't know if any of that will really be meaningful in terms of tangible change on the ground. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm hoping that this spurs movement, but the simple recognition is too little too late, and we need to move on from just the conversation about what's happening to intervening in what's happening.
You noted that the Israelis are starting to recognize this. We should say there was a pretty notable speech that Netanyahu gave recently, where he effectively recognized Israel's deepening isolation and said that the Israeli economy is going to have to turn into some Sparta-like system, which is just hyper focused on militarism. And building its military industry in such a way so that it can be reliant on itself and only itself. At the same time, Yara, you noted all the different people who are starting to say that it is genocide. There are also some folks who are still saying that it's not, including, right, the government of the UK recently came out with an assessment saying that no, we still don't think it's genocide. And of course, this matters in part because these governments have legal obligations as parties to the Genocide Convention. If they recognize this as a genocide, right, there are certain legal obligations that follow from that. And of course, the UK is one of those countries that is deeply, deeply implicated in this genocide through their military support, through their intelligence assistance, and so on. And they're obviously not there yet, and probably not going to get there. But there seems to be growing pressure on the United Kingdom, on the government of the United Kingdom, from other voices in Europe, and now internally also within the Labour Party, as you noted, right? The mayor of London has finally came out and said, this is a genocide. And you wonder how much longer the government in the UK will be able to continue to pretend that a genocide is not a genocide. I wanted to hear from others on this point as well. Hanna?
Yeah, I'd like to comment actually on the European Commission. I think this is interesting. So what's being proposed here is that the European Commission would suspend a free trade agreement with Israel. And now that's significant for the Israeli economy because there are about almost $6 billion in Israeli exports to Europe that would be affected by this. The cost after these duties and tariffs are imposed on Israel would be just a little bit over $200 million. So it's not a small amount of money, but ultimately these are not sanctions. And so the big debate that's happening actually amongst members of the European Commission is actually about whether this agreement is enough or if total sanctions are needed. So we know that states like Spain are really leading the charge there. And so much of this is responsive to the fact that in many European capitals, we've seen mass rallies consistently of hundreds of thousands of people. In some cases, some of these cities draw in 1 million people. And so I think this is something that's very important to note because, like you had mentioned, Yousef, Netanyahu is gearing up to prepare his people for hits like this. These are not sanctions, of course, that are being proposed, but it could head in that direction. And there's this push to sort of look inwards. And I think it really speaks to this disparity about how the internal Israeli picture has been depicted for a long time. And I think there's been sort of a conflation of how the arms industry has profiteered significantly and how Israeli weapons manufacturers have profited exponentially during this period, or Israelis who are investors or leaders within some of these major tech companies, surveillance companies, and what have you, and the actual impact that it's had economically in Israel. There are real felt economic impacts for Israelis during that time. The tourism industry has been destroyed in many cases and in many different respects. Like last year, things like agricultural tourism in the summer of 2024 were hit significantly, and this had its effect. And so I do think sometimes there is there's sort of a false conflation of these two things that are both true at the same time. And so yes, getting to the S and BDS and seeing sanctions imposed are important, but that, like I think Yara had mentioned earlier, so long as Washington is sending over the F-35s and Washington is sending over the arms, Israel knows that it can count on its people, or is betting on its people, shouldering whatever sort of inconveniences they might have to deal with as a result. And so again, on some level, yes, this could move beyond the symbolic, but on some level, there's still need for far, far more pressure on Israel.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Hanna, I think you're absolutely right. So much of what we're seeing so far seems so basic, so incremental, that it's almost as if there's an understanding that there's going to be a need over time to have a lot of space to ratchet up pressure. It's almost as if all of these countries, the Israelis included, recognize that this is not stopping anytime soon, and that there is actually a long-term plan in place here for the continuation of this genocide, and we're seeing a slow walking of a response from so many of these different countries. I want to talk about the big elephant in the room, which is U.S. support for Israel. This is Israel's most important strategic asset. And The Economist is out with a cover story today. And the focus of that cover story, the headline is "America is falling out of love with Israel." And this, is a story we've been hearing a lot about and seeing develop over several months, really years now. But it seems like we're at a stage now that we really haven't been before, where the level of sort of opposition and resentment to what Israel is doing here in the United States has reached a greater extent than any time prior. The Secretary of State was just in Israel the other day, standing side by side with Netanyahu, doing all kinds of photo ops in Jerusalem, and really laying the groundwork for continued support, not just for what Israel is doing in Gaza, but also for Israel's designs on the West Bank as well. But while the Trump administration still seems to be solidly behind Netanyahu's government, are Americans moving in a different direction? What do you expect to see moving forward in terms of the U.S. public's relationship with Israel?
Well, this has been going on for years, as you've mentioned. It's accelerated since the genocide, but the trend is very clear going back about 15, 20 years, that more and more of the American public wants an even-handed American position between Israel and Palestine. They're not instinctively, chromosomally pro-Israeli. The government has become very pro-Israeli because of the incredible lobbying effort that the Israeli government and its allies in the West have carried out for the last really 100 years. We're still feeling the aftershocks of how effectively the pro-Israeli groups, starting in the 1920s, but really in the 1960s onwards, made Israel in the United States public eye something special and unique and dear to American values. which the Americans then linked to the strategic competition with the former Soviet Union and things like that. And you still have American leaders who talk about Israel as an outpost of democracy among the barbarians and things like that, which the early Zionist leaders used to talk about as well. So that incredible century of intellectual indoctrination, most of which was based on lies and exaggerations and deceptions, was very effective. And it takes time for that kind of intellectual rot to be, it's like pus that's got to come out of the diseased system. And that's what we've been seeing in the last 10, 15 years or so. And it accelerated recently with the genocide, mainly on the basis of age. Younger Americans, including Jewish Americans, including MAGA Americans, even including Republicans. A poll last week showed that even among MAGA Republicans or evangelicals, the young people are far less supportive of Israel than people over the age of 40. So this age divide is really crucial. It links with a big age divide in the U.S. in terms of media consumption, where the public gets its information, and the very few young people get information from the mass media. They get it from social media and progressive media and things like that. So this is all going on here at the same time, and there's a very, very slow change taking place in the public sphere, which is not reflected in the official policies of the U.S. government. But that slow change is reflected in the changes in the congressional actions that are going on, and the incredible slow recognition by officials in the U.S. at different levels of government that they cannot simply maintain the old 100% pro-Israel position, Israel right or wrong. So this is something that is very slow. It takes time. Policy change takes a long time. The critical element to keep looking for is if and when the Israeli policies, especially in Gaza, but also in other areas, start to become a domestic American electoral issue. That has started to some extent. You see it in some primary races. You saw it last year with the Kamala Harris candidacy and other things. So we're seeing signs of that happening already, which is really historic. The big issue is how much of this is strong enough to push ordinary Americans to vote against the incumbent Republican pro-Israel system, and how much is the sentiment in the U.S. public in support of Palestinian rights remaining as a secondary issue to bigger concerns that Americans have, like inflation, like immigration, and other things. The great convergence taking place, as I watch it here, is how the pro-Israeli groups are pushing policies in the U.S. that start to savage the American system of constitutional rights and freedoms, freedom of expression, the independence of universities, the right of people to express themselves openly. And we're starting to see there, again, an important new dynamic, which is that Israel is not only opposed because of what it does in Gaza, it's opposed for pushing a totalitarian fascist kind of governance system inside the U.S. that starts by silencing Palestinian voices and then silences other voices as well. So it's like the strategic shift taking place in the Arab world's desire to diversify its strategic defense relationships. This is a very slow, incremental process. But we've seen enough signs now in the last 2 years, but especially the last 10 years, we've seen enough signs that the trend is very clear. We just have to be patient and keep working at it. And the last point I'd make here is that it's so important to note that every action taken by pro-Israeli American groups or the American government on behalf of Israel that is deemed to be controversial or illegal or immoral is challenged immediately in every medium that's available: the courts, the media, the streets, elections, public voices, every dimension of American life has been activated by those people who support justice for Palestinians and equal rights for Israelis and Palestinians. Every dimension of life has been activated, and this is unprecedented. We've never seen this before. The American system has done this for other things like gender equality, environmental rights, racial equality, and that's one of the issues that people have to deal with, which is the current American leadership is trying to claw back all those gains in all those areas. And some people are now associating support for Israel or Israeli influence with this right-wing fascist tendency in the US. So it's a historic moment, but one of slow change, and we need to keep noting. So Yara needs to update her article every 6 months to look at where this change is happening and how close is it getting to the concerns of politicians who have to run for office. And I think there was a vote in the Senate yesterday or a few days ago where more than half the Democrats voted for Palestinian justice. That's an incredible milestone, but it's still only a part of the Senate, not enough for a full vote. So keep your eye on this issue.
If I may add very quickly, I just, in this very polarized U.S. Context, I can think of no other issue where Republicans and Democrats are moving closer together than the question of U.S. military financing and U.S. unconditional support for the state of Israel. It's literally the only issue that I can think of. It's the only issue I can think of where, we might have some indications here or there that, let's say, for example, the question of quality of life for young Americans, that, millennial and Gen Z Americans, older Gen Z Americans can't afford to buy homes, that they can't afford to start families, that the quality of their lives is at a lower level than their parents' generation was for the first time, I think, since World War II. I think that's how this has been discussed. But in those situations where you can have prominent voices on the right sort of agreeing with some of the discourse that comes from the left, this all falls apart when you talk about why and what is to be done about it. I do see a difference sort of rhetorically when it comes to U.S. military aid to Israel. And so I think this is something to watch moving forward and to see if something can come of this.
I would add just one last point, if I could. The really dramatic signs that are emerging only in the last couple of months is the split within the MAGA movement, which is the core for Trump, and the split, the beginning of a split within the evangelical movement, where younger evangelicals, who are mostly Republican voters, are also becoming much more even-handed on Palestine. And so these two constituencies are critical for Trump. And if they both start to dilute his majority, you can be sure that the Trump and the political elite who are threatened by this American public embrace of justice in Palestine for everybody, that they will react to it in political terms.
Well, I think we'll have to leave it there for our conversation today, but I'm sure these are themes that we are going to be talking about again and again in the months to come, and especially as we move closer to midterm elections and then ultimately the next presidential election in 2028, where these themes may factor rather significantly. But we'll leave more conversation for another day. Thank you all.